No one expects a single mistake to change two lives forever, but for Ethan Caldwell and Lily Summers, it all began with one syringe, one careless decision, and a truth that refused to stay hidden. New York City woke up that morning to its usual chaos, streets buzzing with ambition and secrets, while Ethan Caldwell sat behind the glass walls of his private office 33 floors above Fifth Avenue. He was the kind of man whose last name opened doors and closed mouths. His biotech empire worth billions had built its fortune partly on the booming fertility industry. On paper, Ethan's life was the kind other men dreamed of. A penthouse that touched the sky, a fiancé the tabloids worshipped, and a frozen future planned to perfection. All neat, all controlled. At the same moment, Lily Summers counted every crumpled dollar bill she had left. Her mother's hospital bill was overdue. Her next semester's tuition hung by a thread. Working night shifts at a 24-hour diner could only stretch so far when rent, groceries, and medical debt swallowed every tip she made. The flyer taped above the student job board promised a quick way out. One appointment, one procedure, and she could walk away with enough money to keep her mother's treatment going. It sounded simple, safe. She had never even had a boyfriend, never crossed any line her mother begged her to respect. But desperation makes people brave and blind at the same time. At the fertility clinic, Lily sat in the waiting room hugging her backpack like armor. The nurse behind the frosted glass smiled when Lily whispered she was still a virgin. It did not matter, the nurse said kindly. It was just an egg donation, a chance to help someone else and help herself too. Across the sterile hallway, Dr. Alan Harris stared at the fresh vial labeled Ethan Caldwell. It was standard. The billionaire's DNA preserved by law required for any future child, if anything ever happened to him. His beautiful fiancée, Veronica, demanded it, calling it responsible. Ethan signed the consent forms because it was easier than arguing. He trusted his father's old partners, the chain of clinics his company partly owned. But Dr. Harris was no longer the perfect doctor his framed diplomas claimed. The loan sharks at his door did not care about his degrees. He owed them more than he could repay. When he opened the locked cabinet and swapped 2 labels, he told himself it was harmless. One donor was rich. One girl was poor. No one would know. In that silent white room, Lily lay trembling on a narrow bed. The nurse squeezed her hand, while Dr. Harris did his work. 15 minutes later, Lily sat up a little dizzy, but relieved. She would have money in her account soon. She would fix her mother's next round of treatment. She would go back to her textbooks and coffee-fueled nights. She would never think about this day again. But outside the clinic, the city roared with secrets bigger than her plans. Ethan stood in his office, ignoring Veronica's calls about wedding photographers. She wanted the cover of every magazine, a grand ceremony under a ceiling of roses. Ethan just wanted to breathe. He watched the sun slide between skyscrapers and wondered when he started feeling so alone. What he did not know was that inside Lily's fragile body, something unexpected had begun, cells dividing, life growing. A future neither of them signed for, but both would soon have to fight for. Lily stepped onto the cold sidewalk, holding a small envelope with her payment. She whispered a promise to herself that one day she would never need money she did not earn the hard way. She did not know that promise was already broken. No contract, no lawyer, no private penthouse could stop what was coming. In a city built on secrets, one mistake can be the only honest thing left. One innocent life can rewrite every lie that built an empire. And sometimes, the person you never met is the only one who can save you. Ethan Caldwell's name opened doors in Manhattan's tallest towers, but when the lights of the city dimmed behind tinted glass, he sat alone at a marble desk covered with contracts that told him who he was allowed to be. He was 33 years old, a man with an empire built on laboratories and clean reputations, yet he could not remember the last time he felt like he owned any piece of his own story. His father, Richard Caldwell, had left him a fortune tied up in biotech patents and a family trust that controlled every major fertility clinic from coast to coast. From the outside, people said Ethan was cold and brilliant, a perfectionist who trusted no one except the boardroom table where he spent his days counting profits and pretending his life was under control. At the same time, Lily Summers woke each day in a studio apartment so small she could reach the sink from her bed, but at least it was hers. She kept a photo of her mother taped above the cracked bathroom mirror, her mother smiling despite the oxygen tube curled beneath her nose, reminding Lily why every penny counted. Lily was 21, a nursing student at City College, juggling textbooks she could barely afford with night shifts at a diner, where drunks left quarters on sticky tables and called her sweetheart as if that paid her bills. Most nights, she came home too tired to sleep, her shoes damp from the subway steps, her eyes burning from stale coffee and fluorescent lights. Yet every morning, she told herself that if she just kept going, if she stayed good and careful, life would reward her someday with more than overdue rent and hospital invoices that never stopped coming. Ethan's fiancée, Veronica Blake, meanwhile rehearsed smiles in the reflection of a penthouse window overlooking Central Park, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder as she scrolled through gossip headlines on her phone. The tabloids loved her. They called her the new face of New York high society, though behind her perfect makeup, Veronica's eyes stayed sharp, calculating how many zeros Ethan's name could add to her future. Their engagement photo sat in every glossy magazine, Ethan in a tailored suit, Veronica leaning into him like she belonged there forever. But Ethan could not remember what her laugh sounded like when cameras were not pointed at them. They had met at a charity gala where Veronica wore diamonds borrowed for the night and a smile she never took off. She told Ethan she loved how driven he was, how powerful he looked when he talked about saving lives through science. And Ethan let himself believe it because the lie was prettier than loneliness. In another corner of this city that never forgives weakness, Dr. Alan Harris sat behind his cluttered office desk at the same fertility clinic that bore the Caldwell name in polished gold letters at its entrance. His medical degree hung above him like a judge. Alan had started out with good intentions. He wanted to help families have what nature sometimes stole. But debts have a way of staining clean hands, and the loan sharks who waited outside his door every week cared nothing for the oaths he once swore in med school. Now he stared at the test results that confirmed what he feared most. The vial swap he told himself was harmless had worked. Lily Summers had been given Ethan Caldwell's future, without either of them signing the consent line that kept mistakes like this buried. While Ethan reviewed merger contracts in a tower that touched the clouds, while Veronica planned their next photo shoot with wedding planners and celebrity florists, while Lily swept the diner floor after the last drunk stumbled into a cab, Dr. Harris sat in the back office shredding paperwork and praying no one would ever know what he did. If the truth escaped these walls, the entire clinic could fall, and with it, Ethan's spotless name and the billions behind it. And what about Lily, who still clutched that manila envelope under her pillow, like it was her ticket to keep her mother breathing through winter? She could not imagine her name tangled with the Caldwell empire. She could not imagine what it meant that her body now carried a secret more valuable than any signature. Ethan's world was clean steel and glass and silence at the end of long meetings. Lily's was noise and coins counted twice and phone calls with her mother's voice fading in and out over hospital beeps. Somewhere between them, an invisible thread had been tied without permission. It would pull them together whether they wanted it or not, whether Veronica's diamond ring stayed on Ethan's finger or shattered when secrets turned to scandal. New York City has a way of swallowing truth when it is small, but this truth was already growing, and neither Ethan nor Lily knew that by the time spring came, nothing in either of their careful lives would ever be clean and quiet again. Lily Summers first noticed something was wrong one Tuesday afternoon as she stood behind the diner counter wiping down chipped coffee mugs and forcing a smile at the last two customers who sat arguing about baseball scores. The nausea came in sudden waves rolling through her body so sharply she had to grip the edge of the counter just to steady her breath. She blamed the cheap coffee she lived on, blamed exhaustion, and too many nights awake with her textbooks spread open on her knees. But when the wave did not pass, when it came back the next day and the day after that, when she found herself running to the tiny bathroom behind the diner, more than once in a shift, Lily knew it could not just be bad food or stress. She remembered the clinic, the calm voice of the nurse explaining the risks and the paperwork she signed too quickly, because the words confidential and safe sounded like a lifeline when your mother's hospital room smelled of antiseptic and debt. The check they gave her was long gone spent on a single week of her mother's care and overdue rent. Now Lily stood in line at a corner pharmacy, clutching a pregnancy test she could not afford, her heart pounding so loud she thought the woman behind the counter might hear it. She waited in the bathroom of her tiny apartment, eyes squeezed shut, as the minutes crawled by, the plastic stick trembling in her hand. When she looked and saw two bright lines, she sat on the cold tile floor until her legs went numb. It was impossible. She had never even been touched by anyone, never been on a real date, never felt another heartbeat against her own in the dark. She thought of her mother's gentle voice, the promise she made to stay safe, to finish school, to never let desperation corner her into something she would regret. The tears came hot and fast, but the fear came sharper, a blade pressed to her chest. What would people think? How would she explain a baby that could not possibly be hers? Days turned into nights, nights into restless hours at the diner, where the whispers started the moment she stepped behind the counter. It was small at first, the way her coworkers looked at her belly when they thought she wasn't watching. The sly comments about good girls and bad choices. Lily heard everyone, but kept her eyes down her hands, busy scrubbing plates and wiping sticky booths. She still called the clinic, her voice breaking each time she left messages for Dr. Harris, messages he never returned. When she finally cornered a nurse at the front desk on her one day off, the woman's eyes darted away as she told Lily the doctor was unavailable and that she should not worry so much, mistakes never happened there. In a tower of steel and glass across the city, Ethan Caldwell barely registered the crisis unfolding 3 floors beneath his name. He had other fires to put out. Veronica's latest interview for a celebrity wedding magazine painted him as the devoted fiancé ready to sign over his legacy for love, while Ethan read the quotes with the kind of numb dread that made him wish he could disappear behind numbers and balance sheets forever. His brother Oliver Caldwell kept calling at odd hours, demanding answers about the fertility division's revenue reports. Ethan brushed him off, assuming it was another play for a bigger slice of the company. He did not know his own brother had already smelled blood in the water and was waiting for the right scandal to break his control. One night, Lily's legs gave out behind the diner counter. She collapsed between tables, sticky with spilled beer, and crumbs, the sound of plates crashing to the floor, barely covering the hush that fell over the room. The manager called an ambulance when she would not wake up. At the public hospital, a young intern read her chart, eyes wide, when he asked how long she had been pregnant. Lily heard herself whisper the words she could barely believe. "I'm a virgin." The intern laughed at first, then saw the fear in her eyes and fell silent. Word spread like wildfire in the tiny world Lily moved through, from the diner to the community college, where gossip traveled faster than any lecture note. The stories twisted into ugly shapes, each more cruel than the last. She heard that she had lied about being pure for pity, that she had taken money to carry someone else's child. Girls she thought were her friends turned away in hallways, whispering behind hands that pretended to hide their laughter. Her mother, still fighting through treatments she could barely afford, cried when Lily tried to explain, too sick to make sense of something that made no sense at all. In his corner office, Ethan caught the first whisper of the mistake when a sealed envelope landed on his desk, an anonymous note clipped to the top with 2 words scrawled in black ink, "Ask Harris." Inside, a copy of a clinic record, Lily's name circled in red next to his own donor number. Ethan read it twice, then 3 more times, before storming down to the floor where the fertility branch kept its spotless lab. Dr. Harris tried to lie, tried to talk circles around a truth that refused to bend under the weight of Ethan's voice when he finally demanded the truth. One look at Harris's sweaty hands and darting eyes told Ethan enough. The mistake was real. The name he did not know belonged to a girl who had every right to destroy him if she ever found out who he was. Veronica heard the rumors first, from the same people she paid to whisper gossip about her rivals. She cornered Ethan that night in his penthouse, her silk robe slipping from her shoulder as she dripped honeyed concern into every word. "Darling, it's nothing a clerical error, you have lawyers for this." But Ethan had seen Lily's file. He knew now the procedure was real, that the child inside her carried his blood, whether the world believed it or not. He barely heard Veronica threaten to handle the problem her own way if he did not. When Ethan tracked Lily down, she was leaving the hospital pharmacy with a bag of prenatal vitamins she could not afford. He waited by the exit, the city's cold wind whipping around them as she stopped short, staring at the stranger in a black coat who knew her name before she could ask how. He told her the truth in the plainest words he could find. She looked at him, her eyes so wide and wounded he could not stand to meet them for long. She did not cry, not there, in the frozen air outside the hospital. She just nodded, clutching the plastic bag to her chest like a shield. They sat in his car while traffic crawled past, words falling between them like stones dropped down a well. Lily asked what would happen to her, to the baby. Ethan did not have answers. He offered money first, the only language he knew to fix mistakes. Lily flinched like he had struck her. She told him no, she did not want his money. She just wanted this nightmare to make sense. When he asked if she would get rid of it, her hand flew to her belly, protective and fierce, as if he had threatened her own breath. In that moment, Ethan saw what the mistake had created. Not a scandal to bury or a secret to sign away with a lawyer's pen, but a life that tied him to this fragile stranger whose eyes held more strength than he had ever found in boardrooms and marriage contracts. He offered her protection, then not money, a promise he did not know how to keep yet, but one that felt truer than any he had made to Veronica or to his father's legacy. Lily did not trust him, not yet. But when she walked away that night, she did not feel as alone as she had before. She knew his name. Ethan sat in his car long after she disappeared into the hospital's flickering lights, wondering when his perfect world had slipped so far from his control. Wondering if this broken girl might be the only honest thing left in a life built on spotless lies. In the days that followed, Lily's name turned into a whisper that never seemed to leave Ethan's ears. He lay awake in his penthouse, the city's lights blinking like distant stars, while Veronica paced the marble floor on her phone, barking orders to a crisis manager she trusted more than her own fiancé. She told Ethan not to worry, that the girl was a nobody, that she could be silenced if they threw enough money at her. Ethan listened without speaking, his eyes fixed on a single line in the hospital report that tied his name to Lily's body in a way that no contract or ring on Veronica's finger ever could. Down in the cramped apartment Lily still called home, the air grew heavier every day as hospital bills piled higher on the cracked table. Her mother's coughing fits lasted longer through the night. When Lily tried to hide her tears, her mother touched her cheek with a trembling hand and whispered that everything would be all right, though they both knew hope was running out like water through a cracked glass. Lily had stopped going to class because whispers turned into stares. Stares turned into questions she could not answer, and every door that once opened for her at the nursing school now seemed to close before she even knocked. One night, exhausted from endless questions she could not answer, Lily slipped back into the fertility clinic, hoping to find Dr. Harris alone. She found him in his office, sleeves rolled up, face drawn tight, as he shredded paper after paper into a bin already overflowing with confetti that could bury the truth if he worked fast enough. She stood in the doorway, watching him jump when he saw her reflection in the dark glass. His hands froze, paper caught halfway through the shredder. She asked him why. Why her? Why this? Why had he stolen her future and replaced it with something she never asked for? Dr. Harris could not look her in the eye. He stammered through excuses about paperwork and samples about debts and threats she would never understand. She wanted to scream, but the words died in her throat when she saw the fear in his eyes, the way his hands trembled when she asked if anyone else knew. He told her about Ethan, about the billionaire who now knew her name, because of one mistake that should never have happened. Lily left the clinic without another word, her feet carrying her through the city's frozen streets, while her mind tried to make sense of how her life had become something sold and traded, like numbers on a screen. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his father's old office on the top floor of Caldwell Biogen, a glass tower that seemed to mock him with its polished walls and spotless marble floors. His father's portrait stared down at him from behind the desk, a reminder of the legacy that now felt like a noose around his throat. Oliver, his older brother, stood at the window pretending to admire the skyline, while Ethan read the financial reports again and again, his mind unable to settle on the columns of numbers that once made him feel invincible. Oliver asked questions that felt too pointed. What was going on in the fertility division? Why had legal quietly frozen part of the donor accounts? Ethan lied badly, telling him it was nothing, just an audit. But Oliver's smile said he knew better. Veronica watched Ethan more closely now, her sweet words turning sharp when she caught him staring out the window too long when he ignored her plans for the wedding. She still told the press would be the society event of the year. She whispered into her phone when she thought he could not hear, feeding scraps of half-truths to her publicist trying to spin the story before it spun her out of Ethan's perfect life. She knew the power she held was slipping thread by thread, and the girl named Lily Summers was the blade that would cut it all away if she did not move fast enough. It was Carmen, Ethan's father's old secretary, who first gave Ethan the courage to see what he did not want to see. Carmen had worked for Richard Caldwell since she was 16, back when the company was no more than a single lab in a rented warehouse. She had watched both boys grow into men who forgot what family meant the moment they tasted real power. She saw the new reports, the gaps in the donor files, the quiet hush money Veronica tried to authorize behind Ethan's back. One evening, when Ethan sat alone staring at a whiskey glass he had no desire to drink, Carmen knocked on his office door and laid a thin folder on his desk. She told him to read it carefully, then asked him a question that would not let him sleep for days. Did he want to be like his father, who hid secrets until they poisoned every part of him? Or did he want to be the man his mother once prayed he would become? While Ethan wrestled with the ghosts of a father who taught him power, but never love, Lily found herself in a hospital room she knew too well. Her mother's breathing was shallow, the oxygen machine whirring louder than the words the doctors used to tell her. There were more bills, more treatments, more impossible numbers she could not pay. She looked at her mother's face and wondered what kind of daughter she had become, what kind of mother she would soon be, if the world outside never stopped punishing her for a truth she never chose. When Ethan walked through the hospital corridor and found her sitting alone, head bent over her knees, he saw not the poor girl carrying his child, but the quiet desperation he had seen in his mother's eyes, once when she thought no one was looking. He sat beside her without a word, handing her a cup of bitter coffee she could not afford. She did not thank him. She asked him what would happen next. He told her he did not know. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell admitted he did not have an answer money could buy. He offered to pay for her mother's care, for a better apartment, for a safe place, where no one would whisper about her in hallways she used to call home. She shook her head and told him she would not be his problem to fix. He said she was not a problem, she was the only thing in his life that felt real, now that the walls were cracking around him. She did not believe him. But when her mother was moved to a private room the next day, when the hospital administrator told her the bills had been settled. She knew it was Ethan's money and his guilt that paid for it. She hated that she felt relief mixed with resentment every time she looked at the baby growing under her ribs. Outside the safety of that hospital room, Veronica's quiet war sharpened into a blade ready to cut deeper than gossip. She met Oliver in a corner booth of a hotel bar, their heads bent close together as they planned a story that would end Lily's part in this mess before she ever saw the inside of Ethan's world. They would leak photos, make it look like Lily was paid to seduce him, claim she planned the pregnancy for money. Oliver wanted Ethan out of the company, Veronica wanted him tied to her forever. And Lily was the thread they both needed to snip before the wedding planners called off the deposit for the cathedral flowers. But secrets are heavy things when they pile up in the dark. And somewhere between the quiet promises Ethan made at Lily's hospital door and the stories Veronica spread through polished gossip sites, the truth found a way to breathe. It spoke through Carmen's careful folder, through Dr. Harris's sudden disappearance, when questions got too close, through Lily's tired voice, when she finally told Ethan that no matter how hard they tried to control her, she would not run away. She would keep the child that was half of him, even if it cost her the tiny pieces of a normal life she had left. In the end, Ethan made a choice his father never did. He looked at Lily, sitting by her mother's bed, one hand on her belly, and promised her she would not face this alone. He would stand beside her, even if it meant burning down the polished tower his father built to keep men like him trapped in gold cages. Lily did not trust him yet, but when she let him hold her hand for the first time, her fingers trembling against his palm, Ethan Caldwell knew something had shifted. The truth was no longer a secret to bury. It was the only part of him worth saving. The first time Lily realized the city could be crueler than any lie whispered behind her back was when she found the note taped to her apartment door. 4 words scribbled in red marker, ugly and sharp. "Go back where you belong." She ripped it down before her mother could see, crumpled it into her coat pocket, and tried to tell herself that words on paper could not touch the life growing inside her. But when she walked down her block later that night and felt eyes on her from windows she used to trust, she knew someone wanted her gone. Someone wanted her to break before the truth ever reached the world outside. Inside Ethan's world, walls, once so steady, now echoed with threats he could not outrun. Oliver stopped pretending to hide his smile when investors called him directly, asking about rumors they heard in hotel lobbies and private golf clubs. They asked about the girl, the mistake, the quiet hush money that had not stayed quiet enough. Veronica's voice turned sugar-sweet each time she sat beside Ethan at charity dinners, her fingers brushing his sleeve like they used to when she still believed his name would buy her a crown. But when the cameras left, her whisper cut deeper than any blade. "Fix this, Ethan. Make her disappear. Do what your father would have done." Ethan wanted to say he was not like his father, but each time he saw Lily standing alone at her mother's bedside, her back straight, despite the bruises of gossip she wore like a second skin, he wondered if the part of him that once believed power could fix everything was dying too slowly. He wanted to shield her, to wrap her in glass, so the world's claws could not touch her. But Lily did not want saving, not the kind that cost her pride. She told him once, late at night, when her mother slept and the baby kicked soft against her ribs, that she would rather be poor and honest than rich and owned. Her words sank deeper than any promise his father ever carved into company ledgers. Still, the storm outside their fragile truce refused to quiet. Veronica's plan to bury Lily under lies found new fuel when Oliver handed her a file full of photos taken by a private investigator. Grainy snapshots of Lily leaving Ethan's building, Lily buying groceries with an envelope of cash she barely wanted to touch. Proof, Oliver said with a smirk, that the world would see her as a gold digger before they ever saw her as a girl who never asked for any of this. Veronica promised the tabloids an exclusive. The headlines hit the next morning, black letters that painted Lily Summers as a schemer who seduced a billionaire with a made-up story about virginity and accident. Lily woke to find her face on news sites she had never read, her name turned to poison in the mouths of people she would never meet. She threw her phone into the kitchen sink when it would not stop buzzing with strangers who wanted a piece of her shame. Ethan found her sitting on the apartment floor, knees pulled tight to her chest, her breath coming in short gasps that sounded too much like someone drowning in air. He did not ask her if she was all right, because the answer was too obvious. He sat beside her instead, his back against the chipped counter, his hand covering hers until the shaking stopped. They tried to plan their next step while the world outside sharpened its teeth. Carmen slipped them copies of contracts Veronica signed with gossip magazines, secret payments traced back to Oliver's hidden accounts. Ethan's lawyers warned him that going public could backfire, that the Caldwell board would see his weakness as proof he was not fit to hold the company his father once bled to build. Ethan listened, nodded, then tore up the draft statements they wanted him to read. He did not want lawyers to fix this. He wanted the truth to breathe without scripts or PR lines. One rainy afternoon, Lily found herself back at the clinic where it all began. She sat in the same chair outside Dr. Harris's office, her fingers drumming on the armrest, while the nurse behind the counter avoided her eyes. When Dr. Harris finally opened the door, he looked older than she remembered, his shoulders bent under the weight of secrets that did not want to stay buried. She asked him to tell the truth. He told her he could not. Not with the debts still chained around his wrists. Not with Veronica's threats ringing in his ears each time his phone buzzed at night. She asked him what his silence was worth. He looked at her belly, then at the folder she carried under her coat, the one Carmen gave her with contracts that tied him to a mistake that could end more than just his career. When Lily stood, she did not shout or cry. She simply told him that if he did not speak up now, the world would find out anyway. And when it did, his name would not be worth the ink that signed it once. She left him alone in that cold office, the smell of antiseptic and fear thick enough to choke him long after she walked away. Outside, the world moved too fast for secrets to stay hidden forever. Carmen's careful digging unearthed files. Oliver thought he buried deep payments that proved Veronica's hands were not clean. Ethan sat in the back of his father's old study, the room that smelled of cedar and old leather, reading every page, while Lily sat across from him, her eyes steady even as his hands shook. They were two people who never meant to share anything yet. Here they were tangled in a lie that refused to die quiet. When the final file dropped on the table, Ethan looked at her and asked what she wanted. Not money, not security, not the perfect life his fiancée once dreamed of for herself. Lily told him she wanted one thing: the truth. For her mother, for the baby, for herself. Ethan promised her she would have it no matter how many names it burned down along the way. That night, Veronica stormed into Ethan's penthouse, hair flawless, voice dripping venom as she slammed the gossip magazines on his desk. She screamed about betrayal, about image, about the life she built that Lily now threatened to ruin with her cheap innocence and wide eyes. Ethan listened until the walls stopped shaking from her rage. Then he told her it was over: the engagement, the facade, the perfect headline she chased for herself. She laughed high and sharp, then spat out the last card she thought would break him. "If you leave me, I bury her. I bury that girl so deep no one will remember her name, and your father's board will watch you drown without lifting a finger." Ethan told her to try. He told her she never really knew him if she thought fear would chain him now. When she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, the silence that filled the room felt like freedom for the first time in his life. In the days that followed, the storm hit harder. Veronica's team leaked doctored audio clips of Lily begging for money, of Ethan admitting he would make her disappear. Headlines painted him as a predator, her as a liar. Protesters gathered outside the hospital, where Lily's mother lay sleeping chance and cameras, turning a private tragedy into spectacle. Lily watched her mother's chest rise and fall, wondering if the woman who once taught her to fight for every breath would be proud of the daughter who now stood at the edge of a scandal too big to outrun. But when Ethan showed up at the hospital, shoulders squared, despite the ruins swirling around him, Lily saw a man who had decided that some battles were worth losing if it meant keeping something true alive. He knelt beside her in the hospital corridor, his voice rough when he promised he would stand in front of every lie they threw until no one could doubt her again. In the shadows of that promise, Dr. Harris stepped forward at last. One final press conference called in a hotel ballroom crowded with reporters who smelled blood. His voice trembled as he read the statement Lily wrote for him on the back of a diner receipt. He told the world about the switch, the debt, the threats, the guilt that kept him awake each night, while Lily faced whispers and headlines she did not deserve. When the cameras turned from him to Ethan standing beside Lily, holding her hand like it was the only thing that made sense in a world that no longer did, the room fell silent. In that silence, the lie broke open. And for the first time since a single careless mistake tied them together, the truth was louder than the gossip that once tried to bury them both. For a brief moment after Dr. Harris's confession, Lily thought maybe the storm would finally pass, that the world would close its mouth and give her room to breathe again. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps for days, shoving microphones at Ethan and Lily when they left meetings with lawyers who spoke in careful circles about settlements and image control. Carmen stood behind them at every press briefing like a silent guardian, her watchful eyes reminding them that the truth only survives when someone is brave enough to hold it up to the light, no matter how ugly it looks when it's exposed. But Veronica was not done. The truth was never enough for people like her people, who built entire lives on the power of a secret well kept. She vanished from the tabloids for a week, just long enough for people to think she had given up, then reappeared in the glossy pages of a society magazine, sitting on the edge of a velvet chair in a dress that cost more than Lily's mother's hospital bills for a year. She told a story so carefully wrapped in half-lies that even Ethan's allies at the boardroom table hesitated when they read it. She painted herself as the betrayed fiancé who gave up everything to stand by a man who threw her away for a girl who sold her innocence for a payout. She held up doctored emails, old invoices twisted into a narrative that turned Lily's quiet desperation into a conspiracy no one wanted to believe, but everyone wanted to watch unfold. The whispers started again at the diner Lily once called her safe place. Her former boss called her a distraction when journalists cornered him in the parking lot asking for statements. Her professors at nursing school sent polite messages about reviewing her enrollment, her scholarship now under review until the scandal could be sorted. She sat beside her mother's hospital bed, feeling the weight of the world pressing her down until her ribs ached. Some nights she wondered if it would have been easier to disappear, to pack a single bag and run far enough that no camera, no gossip, no billionaire's last name could ever find her again. Ethan saw it too. He watched Lily shrink into herself each time the headlines flared up again, each time a stranger's cruel words turned her quiet dignity into fuel for an online bonfire that would never burn out completely. He offered more lawyers, more public statements, but every plan felt like throwing sand at a tide that would never retreat. One night, while Lily slept, curled on the hospital couch beside her mother's bed, Ethan sat with Carmen in the hallway, his head in his hands. He asked her what his father would have done. Carmen did not flinch when she told him the truth. Your father would have buried her story so deep she would never be found again. Then he would have written a check big enough that no one would ever dare to ask where she went. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. I am not my father. Carmen looked at him, eyes soft but unyielding. Then prove it. Do what he never did. Choose the right thing, even if it costs you everything. While Ethan searched for a way to do that, Veronica found her last weapon. Late one evening, Lily stepped into her apartment to find the door already open, the lock broken like it was nothing more than paper. Her clothes were scattered across the floor. drawers, pulled out the envelope of ultrasound photos she kept under her pillow missing. A single sheet of paper sat on the kitchen counter where she could not miss it. One line scrawled in red marker, the same angry hand that once told her to leave. "You don't belong here." She did not call the police. She called Ethan. When he arrived, she was standing in the wreckage, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. He asked her if she was afraid. She shook her head. She was done being afraid. She was done hiding. She was done letting people like Veronica decide which version of her the world would believe. When Ethan told her he would fix it, she looked him straight in the eye and said she would fix it herself. The next morning, Lily walked into the Caldwell building for the first time, the lobby so polished she could see her reflection in the marble floor. She stood at the reception desk, ignored the stares, ignored the whispers that trailed behind her as she rode the elevator to the top floor. Ethan met her at the office door, his tie askew, eyes wide when he saw the calm in hers. She told him she wanted to stand beside him when they spoke the truth, not behind him, not hidden away like something fragile to be protected. She would look the board in the eye, look the press in the eye, look Veronica in the eye if she had to, and remind them all that mistakes do not define the people they break open. Together, they sat at a long glass table, surrounded by men and women who once called themselves protectors of the Caldwell name. Oliver's chair sat empty, a pointed silence that spoke louder than any accusation. When Lily spoke, her voice did not tremble. She told them how the mistake happened. She told them what she lost. She told them what she chose to keep anyway. She did not ask for pity. She did not ask for a payout. She asked for the truth to stand without apology, even if people like Veronica and Oliver called her every name in the book. When she finished, Ethan stood and told them the part they feared most. He would step down if that was what it took. He would sign away every seat at the table if they tried to force Lily and their unborn child out of his life to keep the Caldwell brand neat and scandal-free. One by one, the board looked away. They understood power and profit, but they understood the cost of public shame more. They knew if they tried to bury Lily now, they would burn too. Outside the building, Veronica waited in the back seat of a town car, a glass of champagne balanced on her knee phone pressed to her ear as she gave one last desperate interview about betrayal and stolen futures. She did not know that while she spoke, Carmen handed Ethan the final piece that would shatter her last hold on him. Copies of contracts showing she used company money to pay off tabloids' bribes, signed in her name enough to bring down her carefully curated image in a single news cycle. When the story broke, her PR team vanished first. Her lawyer followed next. The world that once called her dazzling and unstoppable now called her reckless and ruined. In the quiet after the headlines turned, Ethan and Lily sat side by side in the hospital room where her mother still slept, her breathing softer now, her treatments covered by the man who no longer pretended his name could fix everything, but still tried. Lily looked at Ethan, at the man who once offered her money, like a bandage for a wound he did not yet understand. She saw the man who stayed when running would have been easier. She saw the man who chose to be different from the father who taught him to bury every ugly truth with a bigger lie. When he reached for her hand, she let him hold it, not because she needed him to save her, but because she knew he would stand beside her when she chose to save herself. The baby shifted under her ribs as if reminding her that some lives begin in chaos, but grow strong anyway. She turned to Ethan and whispered the words she once thought she would never say. "We can do this, not because we have to, because we want to." He kissed her knuckles like a promise, his other hand pressed to the small swell of her belly. Outside the hospital window, the city moved on, hungry for its next scandal, its next name to tear apart. But inside that quiet room, the storm had lost its teeth. In its place stood a man and a woman, bound not by money, not by shame, but by the single truth no lie could bury. The mistake that began with a careless syringe had turned into something stronger than both of them. Something no headline could twist into poison. A family fragile and new, but theirs to keep. When spring finally broke through the frozen cracks of New York's gray sidewalks, Lily sat on the steps of the hospital garden, watching sunlight spill across her knees, warm and soft, against skin that still remembered the chill of winter nights spent wondering if she would ever feel safe again. Beside her, Ethan knelt in the dirt sleeves rolled to his elbows as he planted a row of small white flowers under her mother's windowsill, smudging the cuffs of a shirt that once cost more than Lily's entire rent for a month. He could have sent someone else to do it, could have written a check for a landscaper to make it perfect. But instead, he pressed his own hands into the earth, stubborn and clumsy, the same way he pressed himself into a future he never thought he would choose. Lily's mother watched from her bed, smiling faintly each time Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, and looked back at Lily for quiet approval. She knew now who he was, what he was to her daughter. She had seen his name on hospital forms for years, whispered on television screens she could not afford to keep on for long. But seeing him there on his knees in a garden he built for her, she realized some names do not mean much until they are carried with care. A few weeks later, when the last contract was signed and the last lawyer closed their folder, Ethan did what no one in his father's world expected him to do. He gave up the seat at the head of the Caldwell boardroom table, handed the keys to the ones who would run it clean, free from secrets buried beneath perfect glass floors. Some called him reckless. Some called him brave. Lily called him hers. They did not plan a wedding with cathedral ceilings or diamond-laced invitations. Instead, on a quiet afternoon, Ethan stood with Lily under the blooming branches of the garden she once dreamed of escaping to when the city's noise felt too sharp. Carmen was there standing by Lily's mother's wheelchair, the old secretary's hands clasped like a prayer she never dared to say out loud. A nurse who used to slip extra pudding cups to Lily's mother when no one was watching handed Lily a small bouquet of garden roses. No paparazzi, no velvet ropes, no contracts signed under marble arches. Just Ethan and Lily, promises spoken soft enough that only they could hear. When they kissed, the city did not pause to watch, but for them, the world went quiet. The storm that once threatened to drown them had cleared, leaving behind something honest and fragile and new. A life that did not belong to headlines or boardrooms, but to the two people who chose each other when choosing was the hardest thing to do. Months later, when Lily held their daughter for the first time in the same hospital that once carried so much fear and gossip, she looked at Ethan and saw the boy who once believed power could fix anything if you held it tight enough. Now, she saw a man who learned to let go, to stand beside her when letting go was the bravest thing he could do. In the end, the